Welcome you to our Sunday evening series of lectures and discussions on the meanings and benefits of forgiveness. We read about forgiveness in the Bible, hear about it in services, and speak about it in our prayers. But do we really understand our mandate from God to practice the forgiveness we expect? The lectures of these 3 sessions will explore with us, what is forgiveness? Is it just the deliberate avoidance of retaliation? Who should we forgive? All others, no matter what? And how about ourselves? And how can we effectively forgive and still live with the memories? Why should we forgive others? What's in it for us? Interesting questions. Consider that we of the Judeo-Christian family are all walking the path of life through a forest of other souls, known and unknown to us. There are many interactions and challenges on the road from birth to death and our welcome into God's presence. We have been given the rules of the road through the 10 Commandments. We have also been given many road signs and reminders by the prophets. Most specifically, we have the direct teachings of Jesus and the examples of the saints. And if we digress from the path, the repentant have the promise of God's own forgiveness. As Jesus instructed us, we ask to be forgiven as we forgive others. Surely, we will stumble or get lost on the way. To err is human, but to persevere is also human. We trust that there will be a helping hand to strengthen us if we truly reach out for it, or be a clear word to guide us back if we listen to it. We know that we are not alone, even if it seems so sometimes. Believing this, we have the power and obligation to share our strength through the welcome extended to others who would be forgiven. By dumping the excess baggage of planned retaliation and the specifically tailored responses based on past experiences, we can more freely and lovingly interact with others and walk a smoother, straighter path ourselves. Keeping track of forgiveness budget balances can be a distracting burden that can block the joy of life. The bottom line is the golden rule. We should treat others and ourselves as we would have others treat us, not as we perceive they have treated us before. This requires true forgiveness. Now I'd like to introduce Pam Thompson, a valuable member of our St. David's Adult Education Committee. She's our liaison with the John Templeton Foundation, which has been scientifically researching the benefits and power of forgiveness. The foundation is actively encouraging and supporting dialogue in all sectors of our society on this important topic. And Pam will introduce this evening's speakers.
Thank you, Phil. I cannot tell you how exciting it is for me to introduce to you Ev Worthington. Ev comes to us today from Richmond, Virginia, where he is chairman of the psychology department at Virginia Commonwealth University. Everett is a clinical psychologist and is really renowned for his work on forgiveness. He has written several books. I think some of them are in your little pamphlet when you read about him. He's deep into research. How I know Everett is because he is the executive director of the Campaign for Forgiveness Research, which is an initiative started by the John Templeton Foundation to raise $10 million to do research on the subject of forgiveness. And Everett has played a huge part in finding fabulous people to do, social scientists, to do this research, as well as to help them with it. Everett first started out as a nuclear engineer, and he graduated from MIT, and he did his graduate work in psychology at the University of Missouri, Columbia. I hope that you will help me welcome Everett Worthington.
Hi. Not used to speaking from pulpits. I remember being in South Africa and speaking at a congregation in Soweto, which is where the uprising started. It was a totally black African congregation with Zulu dancing and Xhosa, and I was speaking along, and it was being translated into Xhosa, and I would say something, and then the guy would say something, and then people would go, "Amen, amen." Well, before long, I was like, really wound up into this. But anyway, I'll try to restrain myself tonight. How's that? Pamela asked if I would talk a little bit about, in a very practical way, about how do we talk with someone about a transgression. And I write about that, and I do research on that, but I don't speak on it all that often. And so I was walking around Richmond yesterday trying to figure out what to say. And as I walked, as I was walking down the street, I kicked this can and tripped over it. So I leaned down, I picked the can up, kind of brushed it off, and as I did that, this genie appears. Giant genie. Genie says, "I'm the genie of the can, and I'm here to grant you one wish." And I said, I thought I got 3 wishes. And he says, "You think you're from New York or something? This is Richmond, Virginia. You get 1 wish and count yourself lucky." And, I was traveling, up here, and so I had a map with me. And it's a map of the world, and I pulled it out, and I opened it up, and I said, well, if I only have 1 wish, I would wish for world peace and reconciliation and forgiveness in every heart throughout the entire world. And there was this pregnant silence, and the genie goes, "Can you, give me something to work with here? Did you forget to take your meds this morning or something?" And so I said, okay, well then, I have to go up tomorrow and give a talk up in Pennsylvania. I wonder if you could just make it a stimulating and interesting talk. And the genie says, "Can I have another look at that map?" That was the emotional peak tonight. It's a downhill from there. Well, I do want to talk with you a little bit about how do you talk with someone about a transgression. And I'm going to frame my comments in terms of a marriage, although really this could apply to any 2 people that are talking about, at least most of it could have pertained to any 2 people who are talking about a transgression. So let me begin with just one of the fundamental findings that has come out of marriage research over the last 5 years or so. It's really a finding from a research program by a psychologist out at the University of Washington, John Gottman. Probably most people have seen John Gottman's name in the paper or on television. He's been featured on a number of shows. And in studying marriage for well over 25 years with over 2,500 couples, he has come up with an idea that really goes against the way that theorists used to think about communication. Theorists used to sit in their armchairs and say, everybody has conflict. All couples have conflict. If you're not having conflict, there must be something wrong with your relationship. And that was kind of accepted as the dogma. But John Gottman came in and he actually watched people discuss issues that they disagreed about. And his conclusion was you could divide happy marriages into what I would call a rule of thirds. That is, about a third of all the happy marriages have absolutely no conflict. Just, maybe once every 5 years do they have some kind of disagreement. And about a third of the people have fairly frequent conflict, but it kind of rises up and then subsides. And these are happy couples. And about a third have lots of conflict, and they fuss a lot. They fuss passionately, and they make up passionately. And then you have marriages that aren't so happy, and those tend to have either a whole lot of conflict or to be so disengaged from each other, it's as if they've turned each other into a stone wall, and a rock feels no pain. So John Gottman says that, we can't expect to have differences that we have to resolve. Sometimes they just seem to resolve by consensus, but in many cases, in 2/3 of the happy marriages and almost all of the unhappy marriages, you do have a lot of things to work out with each other, and things get perceived as being transgressions. So Gottman has found that there's a kind of a cascade down as a relationship begins to disintegrate. And he calls the steps in the cascade the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the approach of the end times. And so he believes that the first thing that happens when marriages start to go sour is people begin to criticize each other. They first criticize their partner silently to themselves, and then they begin to criticize their partner aloud to the partner, and then they begin to criticize the partner to other people. Well, when we get criticized, that often will lead to the second stage in the dissolution of marriages, and that's defensiveness. First, we defend ourselves silently to ourselves, and then we defend ourselves back to our partner, and finally, we defend ourselves publicly. The third stage in the dissolution of marriage is a stage of contempt for the other person. Now, this is really a fundamental change in my way of looking at things in terms of the way the marriage is operating. Up until this point, generally people are wearing rose-colored glasses. They're able to see the positives with each other. But when they start to feel contempt, not for the act of criticism or the defensiveness against the criticism, but contempt for the person, at that point, it's as if they whipped off their rose glasses and put on dark glasses, and they look at the relationship very differently. They look at the relationship as if they only see the negative. And if the relationship continues to degenerate, then one of two things happens. Either the person stonewalls, turns themselves into a stonewall, you can't get to me, or there's war. Those are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse plus 1. By the way, I did have some handouts. Did y'all get handouts? Okay, all right. So now let me begin to talking about transgressions by defining what I mean by some of the fundamental terms, such as unforgiveness. Now, this is just my definition. I was on a symposium at the American Psychological Association about 1.5 years ago, and there were a number of leading researchers there. We disagreed about the fundamental definition of forgiveness. So I'm not trying to tell you what the definition is. This is the definition that I work from. You may have a different idea about forgiveness. The way that I see unforgiveness at the start is that unforgiveness is a complex interrelationship of emotions. Unforgiveness is emotions. It's anger, hostility, bitterness, resentment, hatred, fear. And those those emotions, those delayed emotions, arise after a period of ruminating about a transgression. You see, when a transgression happens, it's a violation of our boundaries. If we perceive it as a violation of our physical or psychological boundaries, then we say, "You hurt me." And we usually have an emotional reaction to that. It's a hot reaction that is fear. I've been hurt. I don't want to be hurt again. I'm afraid of being hurt again. But if we perceive that a moral violation has gone on, that we don't usually talk about it as "I've been hurt." We say, "I've been offended." And the emotion that an offense generates is an emotion of anger to right that injustice. Fear or anger are usually mixed together, and hurt and offense are usually mixed together. But you can probably just think of the people you know, and there's some people, I bet, that just walk around and they are looking for offenses to happen to them. And they get angry at the drop of a hat. And other people they have hurt antennas, and they just get hurt by everything. But for most people, those two things are mixed together. But those are not unforgiveness. Unforgiveness happens when we replay the event and its consequences for us in the late show of the mind. We run it over again and again and again and turn it into this emotional complex of anger, resentment, bitterness, hatred, all that stuff. We don't like that feeling. That's a nasty feeling to feel. And so we try to get rid of that as fast as we can. And most people think that forgiveness is that thing you do to get rid of unforgiveness. But it turns out that forgiveness is just one of those things that you can do to get rid of unforgiveness. There are probably 30 things that you can do to get rid of unforgiveness. Most of them are biblical. Some of them aren't. One of the things I can do to get rid of my unforgiveness without forgiving is get successful revenge on the person. Right? I'm walking up the stairs, I got a cup of coffee in my hand, somebody bumps into me, knocks the coffee all down my, my nice sweater vest here. So I just pull out my AK-47, mow them away. If I get away from the law, 2 years from now, I have no unforgiveness toward that person, right? See? It's wonderful. It's magic. 3 bikers walked into a roadside diner. It's an old guy in a roadside diner. And one of the bikers walks over to the guy, picks up the guy's lemon meringue pie upside down on the counter, walks over, sits down at the stool. The old guy just looks down, doesn't react. Second biker walks over, picks up the guy's milk, spits in it, sets it down, walks over, sits down by his buddy. The old guy doesn't do anything, just looks down. Third guy walks over, picks up the guy's entire plate and just throws it up in the air. The old guy doesn't do anything. Third biker just goes over and sits down. After a while, the old guy just reaches in his pocket, pulls out a bunch of change, puts it up on the counter, and kind of walks out. As soon as he's gone, the 3 bikers are going, ah, 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 ah. One of the bikers says to the short order cook behind the counter, says, "That wasn't much of a man, was it?" Short order cook says, "Wasn't much of a truck driver either. He just backed over 3 Harleys out in the parking lot." Absolutely no unforgiveness left over with that guy. None, right? Got rid of it. Now, there's lots of ways you can get rid of unforgiveness. You can get rid of unforgiveness by forbearing. That's biblical. Just accepting that this went on. I'm going to just get on with my life. That's not forgiving. You understand? That's forbearing. There's a verse, in the New Testament that talks about forbearing and forgiving and makes a differentiation between the two. You can get rid of unforgiveness by telling a different story, by excusing what the person did, by justifying what the person did, by psychologically defending against, this. There's just many ways. You can get rid of unforgiveness by seeing justice done. You see, if you see justice done, justice, remember, is this icon that has these scales in her hand, and when an injustice happens, the scales gets out of balance, and justice puts the scales back into balance. That can be done through the courts, or it can be done informally if a person apologizes, makes restitution, can I give you something? Or, lowers himself or herself. I am scum. I am so sorry. You see, that puts the balance back into balance. All of those ways will get rid of those feelings, those emotions of unforgiveness. But they are not forgiveness. Well, what's forgiveness? Forgiveness is the emotional replacement of those negative, unforgiving emotions with positive, other-oriented emotions. So I put one set of emotions in place of the other. And those other-oriented emotions are like love for the other person who's harmed me. That might be agape love, or it might be romantic love. Y'all remember Casablanca, the movie? All right. You remember how Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman had fallen in love, but Ingrid Bergman didn't realize it. She's Ilsa in this, in love with Rick. She didn't realize it, but her husband was alive. She thought her husband had died, you see. And so Rick and Ilsa are supposed to go away together, but Ilsa finds that her husband's alive, so she doesn't show up at the train station. He's coming back, right? And so Humphrey Bogart is very unforgiving and bitter toward Ilsa. So now what happens is he establishes a saloon in Casablanca, and who should walk into his saloon but Ilsa and Victor Laszlo, her husband. Of all the gin joints in all the world, she had to come into mine. So there, you see, his unforgiveness is rekindled. But throughout the movie, all back in love, and as the romantic love is also rekindled, that negative emotion is edged out by the positive romantic love between the two of them, until at the end, he lets her fly away with Victor Laszlo into the fog while he and Louis stay to fight the Nazis. You see, romantic love is unforgiveness. As love grew and kind of flared up. So there's an emotional replacement of negative emotions with positive emotions. Reconciliation is the trust in a relationship, and that happens mutually trustworthy. For my skin, it is an emotion. Reconciliation between us. It's an event. Granted is earned. Now let me you're doing when you're talking about it, that's what you're trying to do when you're talking about it. And what I have to recognize, I would have to say that you need by starting in the middle. You build a bridge, each is working in. So both people have to be to make this meet in the middle. This bridge, 4 planks to it, steps that people go. Let me make it. This is the way that this does not necessarily you might reconcile. What people to do go along with some kind of cooperate, do it, that this will reconcile all of this, but this doesn't mean it happens. So the is an